This is Burn This Book, a banned books book club where we, Nicolle and Eden... Sorry.
What is going on?
I thought I heard you breathe out. I heard you breathe out, and I thought you were laughing. So...
Okay, I'm going to read it if you can't get it this time.
Okay.
This is Burn This Book, a banned books book club where we, Nicolle and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which was published in 1985 for adults. This book has been challenged for 3 decades. Eden cannot stop laughing, so we apologize for her silence, which will be inevitable for a while until she can control herself. Because apparently she thinks The Handmaid's Tale is funny. Joining us today is Stephanie Toman, calling in from Pittsburgh. Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the book, and why you agreed to come on our little podcast?
Gladly. So, like you said, I'm calling in from Pittsburgh, but I'm not from here. I grew up in like a pretty liberal area out in Washington State. I went to college in like a conservative state, and I've spent my adulthood between Ohio and Pennsylvania, which are kind of, you know, these swing states. And so I've lived in like a lot of different environments and prevailing belief systems. This is relevant, not just like a biography. I'm a mother. I actually read The Handmaid's Tale for the first time after my daughter was born, which was like a very intense experience. Would not recommend to do that on maternity leave. But she's now in kindergarten. It actually, I just attended my first school board meeting this last week, in large part because on the agenda for the school board meeting was the approval of a book at the middle school level. So my district last year, actually, a group of parents mounted to try to ban The Hate U Give was a book that they were going to teach in high school, and a bunch of parents tried to stop that from happening. And so I was just like really curious for what would happen at the school board meeting. This book is like a graphic novel about life as a refugee. And so I'm like, this is a beautiful book. Kids should read it. What's going to happen? So I like feel really strongly about, kids having access to books. As I was kind of reflecting and preparing, some of like the most impactful books I've read, like growing up in school, have been banned or challenged. The Goosebumps books, which like were like some of the most challenged books. I think it was like number 15 in the 90s, for most challenged. Like that made me fall in love with reading in 4th grade. In high school, I took this like analytical and critical reading class, and when I was looking back at the banned books, a lot of the books I read in that class have actually been banned or challenged in other states, and so I have really like personally benefited from discussions and just like enjoying books. Like Shel Silverstein has been banned, and his poetry also made me love reading. So I don't know. This is like a lot about me and my history with books,
more.
but
more Stephanie.
That's so much of like why I love reading are these, tough stories that help, like you explore realities other than your own. And so I'm excited today to talk about The Handmaid's Tale. Excited always to talk about any book that people don't think kids should be reading. And, like, there are legit books out there that maybe shouldn't be in schools, which is maybe a hot take. I know when I was a teacher during silent reading, kids were reading, like, 50 Shades of Grey. I'm like, maybe not in my class. But I guess if they would have shown me, like, the literary merits of that book, I probably could have been swayed. But otherwise, I think there's just, like, so many helpful lessons to be drawn from some of these books that are often controversial. So thank you for letting me join you today. I hope to be able to like keep up with your insight and measure up to your previous guests.
Yeah. The competition is on. Yeah. And then we will have a winner in the end of the season of which guest was the best guest. Yeah, obviously. You brought up a really good point that I think draws into The Handmaid's Tale before we get into the book summary is like, because, I mean, I think it's very clear that Eden and I are against banning books. But also, we have kind of had hot takes where, like, we don't really, like, there have been certain books that we've read that we've been like, I don't know if I'd actually want that book in my house.
Yeah.
Personally. Like, I don't think I'd really want my kid, like, digging into that book. And I think that that is completely reasonable. I think that, like, parents get to decide what comes in and out of their home, for sure. Public schools, I think, are a little bit different. But there is a line that is awkward, and when you bring up 50 Shades of Grey in the classroom, I don't know. You know, like, our Harlequin romances, should they also be, you know, where there is graphic sex being described? Should they be in school libraries? I don't think so. And so I think, you know, like, there has to be some sort of line that is about age appropriate. But it's interesting to see the themes that people ban usually have to do with racism and witchcraft.
Right. Or, LGBTQ characters.
LGBTQ, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas,
like,
we don't hear a lot of chit-chat about graphic sex and things that are, like, too mature for that body's development. Like, we know the impact of pornography on children, on bodies that have not actually gone through their, like, what's the word? Through puberty, or, like, just even, like, through full development. Like, it triggers things, and so it's complicated. So even when we talk about The Handmaid's Tale, because there is a little bit of graphic stuff in there, I think that it is important to talk about what ages, like, should this be read by freshmen in high school? I don't know. And so I do think that that's an appropriate conversation to have, and I think that's perfectly okay to have these conversations as long as you're not going outright and being like, absolutely no one should read this. We need to burn it, take it out of the school. But I do think, like, because I don't know if I would have understood the themes to this extent until I was an adult, or at least until I had a teacher who was guiding me through it.
Yeah, that's the point I want to touch on, is the teacher guiding. So oftentimes, like, when it comes to books that are being banned or challenged, it'd be interesting to see how many are just free floating in a school library versus part of an English curriculum. If it's part of an English curriculum, I think there is less need to ban or challenge a book because you do have an adult guiding you through it.
Even if that adult is super liberal, super Antifa. Like, it's hard to create a revolution around books like The Awakening by Kate Chopin and stuff like that. Like,
which has been challenged.
But, like, those are usually taught by very liberal teachers. Like, if you're a liberal teacher, you're going to probably bring in some sort of, like, woman's lib kind of stuff. But I don't remember anyone in my class, like, burning their bra because of
and, like, The Handmaid's Tale is often on AP exams. Like, so it's not just a liberal agenda kind of book. It's like, actually, this has been established as, you know, literature that teaches lessons, that is, like, high enough level for deep discussion, not just, you know, hey, what's this about? Let me casual read this on the back of the bus. Like, bringing it back to The Handmaid's Tale.
Exactly. And I think that's also, but thank you. But I think that's also important to think about is AP exams as well.
Oh, well.
Like,
that's its own episode.
If your school's not going to teach, if your school's not going to teach half the stuff that's going to be on an AP exam because you think it's going to be too harmful for your child, all you're doing is hurting that kid's chance of succeeding and going to college. Like, sorry, that's the system we live in. So, like, that is a thing that I don't think that a lot of people who are banding together to ban.
Ooh.
I don't think that they're really thinking about that.
Well, we could turn this into like if you want to ban books, you should ban AP exams, which I would have appreciated as a young child, as a high schooler.
Burn that exam.
Loved my AP exams.
You love the exams?
I loved it. Well, just the English ones, because that was, like, the only time I thrived. Like, AP Econ was terrible. I wrote poems throughout the whole thing. It was so bad.
I took multiple AP classes. I never took an AP exam.
Oh.
So there's a hot take for you.
That is a hot take.
That's kind of working within the system and outside the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks great on my transcript, but, like, I don't know, by the time I was in AP classes, I knew I was going to go to BYU, and they don't care about APs. Like, none of the credits really transfer. So I was like, why would I waste my time taking this test?
Wow,
And so then I got to watch just movies, right, in the class after the AP exam, because teachers aren't teaching anymore after that.
Wow, I wasted time and
great.
money.
Would recommend.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10.
Okay, I guess we can get back to... Sorry, that was... But you brought up a good point, because I don't know what I would do if I was a teacher and a kid was reading 50 Shades of Grey in my classroom.
Yeah.
I guess you're just like, okay.
At least you're reading.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to the summary. So we'll do a quick, just a quick recap. Who wants to take that on?
I can go.
Okay, Stephanie, yes, please.
I mean, if we're talking super quick, like, tagline summary, right? The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian story of, like, a hyper-Christian society where fertile women are kind of, like loaned out to breed children for, like, elite families, right? Like, that's, like, the Handmaids, right? It's rooted in, you know, the Bible of Rachel and here, take my handmaid, because birth rates have declined so drastically in this society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it centers around, like, this one handmaid's story. And you get, right, bits and pieces throughout of kind of how this society came to be, how it's, you know, existing, and the different facets of that society.
An important thing also to note is that the society, the trigger for all of this stuff was a big war that we don't really understand as readers. There's like a coup that was formed on the government, and then everything kind of fell apart. And that's when they realized, like, decline in births really matters. And we just, like, do not understand what's happening outside of this community. We don't even know how big the community is. Mm-mm. The dystopian world that she created is it's set in America for sure. But, like, the community, we don't know if it's, like, a part of... Like, I kept going back to... What's the Mockingjay? Oh, shoot. More time.
Oh, Hunger Games?
Hunger Games, yeah. They, I kept thinking about that. Is like, are there going to be, like, districts, like, in that? You know how that was set in that? And I don't have any understanding. So, all I know is that this world is future tense from where we are, basically. A war has happened and is still happening. And like you said, it's a hyper-Christian society that justifies going back to these, like, old biblical ideals about bringing in other partners as bodies to basically, like, become walking wombs so that we can keep building our population. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of infertility in this community, apparently, as well.
And yeah, I think Margaret makes a point of it being an environmental cause for the infertility. So it is an environmentalist book as well from that perspective. And going off of what Nicolle said, there is a point where there are tourists who have come in and to check out the handmaids. And the way she describes the tourists, it just sounds like modern day people. Mm-hmm. So weird. Yeah. Part of me is like, oh, this is only taking place in Massachusetts. The other part of me is like, wait, is it bigger than Massachusetts? You know, it was just hard to tell the extent, the reach of this new government within America.
It was very, and the tourists came from, like, at one point in the book.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just to add on that. And I think that points to, well, this particular handmaids of Fred. Because the handmaids are named after their current commander. So her current commander's name is Fred.
Dumb name for such a person in power.
Yeah. But because the first thing this government did was remove tons of women's rights. And one of them is right to access to information. And so I think we have a little glimpse into what that is like by not knowing how far-reaching this government is, because of, like, how...
Interesting.
How very little Fred knows. Fred. Mm-hmm. And therefore we know very little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a really, and Margaret Atwood made a point to say, in the documentary that's on HBO Max about Margaret Atwood, that none of the events in the book were made up. She took them from different political things that were happening throughout the world. And do you have that in your notes as well, Stephanie?
Oh, I have a quote from Margaret Atwood. Yes.
Do you want to throw that in there?
Yeah, she said, I made a rule. I would not include anything that human beings had not already done in some other place or time.
Yeah, and so some examples of that is during that, when she wrote the when she was writing the book, Romania had a new leader who had a rule that was forcing women to give birth. And so all women had to take pregnancy tests every single month. And they had to give a reason of why they were not pregnant. And it was like this whole thing. And it became to the point where like these women were just walking wombs in Romania for that time. So that wasn't made up at all. The idea of like all women's credit cards, because we're no longer working with like physical cash, our money just being cut off at the source, because Margaret was like, the only way to really suppress women is to take them out of the workforce and bring them back into the home. And the only way you can do that is cut them off from all their earnings, all their independence. And so you would just do that with credit cards. And so she explained like that in different countries at different points, all of these things were happening. And she also lived in East Germany for a while in West Germany for a while, excuse me, and watched East Germany and the contrast between those two places before the Berlin Wall fell. So a lot of the things in this book come from watching all of these really intense situations happening under different communist leadership. And so I think so when we read this book, that blew my mind because it's not made up. She wasn't just like, oh, this is going to be a crazy world. This is actually happening. These are realities that can happen. And I think the book starts off with this like crazy coup of Congress where everyone just kills everyone in Congress. We don't know who killed the people in Congress in the book, but we know that they've all been murdered and there's a new totalitarian regime and no one really understands it. But they're there to protect and bring them back to like American values. And it was interesting reading this post January 6th because like we saw an effort to do that. And we still don't quite know exactly who was the perfect puppet master of that experience. But like it's creepy how like, yeah, the Margaret Atwood stuff is not unrealistic.
No, I wanna carry that thought forward. And it's interesting that, right, like you named kind of communist countries or other places around the world, but right, there's like a deep history of reproductive suppression in the United States. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting, especially as like the Roe v. Wade stuff has been coming out. Anti-Racism Daily, which is like a publication, they posted some, I thought like a really insightful thought piece around like the use of Handmaid's Tale imagery has been popping up a lot. And they like kind of reminded us of that, like using this fictional dystopian story that like centers white women, like cisgender, heterosexual white women, is like ignoring the very real reality and experiences and history of, right, like marginalized communities in this country. And they cite some examples of, right, like forced sterilization. Yes. It has like a long-standing history in the United States, like specifically for Indigenous women, in like mental health institutions.
And Puerto Rican women too.
They also talk about like, Puerto Ricans. They said almost like, it's like a third or something of Puerto Rican women. And it's like, right, it's almost always against their will. They don't necessarily understand what's happening, right? Recently, this was happening at the border for migrant women. Mm-hmm. And like, this is like, right, not even to mention, right, the rape of enslaved women, right, to produce more enslaved children, right? And so it's not only like, oh, here's examples of this happening in other countries, but actually here's our own country's history of this reproductive suppression and continuing into today around, I don't think we have to have an abortion debate on this podcast. I'd prefer not to, but right, this idea of like not having reproductive control of your body.
Absolutely. And like in the liner notes of this one, I'll have Eden. I'm going to make you.
Oh, you're going to make me?
Yeah. So listen up. But I think we should add links to different resources.
Okay.
To better understand sterilization and forced birthing. There was a conversation about just like the idea that we're centering this white woman when this is just like the TV show specifically is just the story of Harriet Tubman. And Margaret Atwood made it very clear that the TV show and her book are not the same thing. That the TV show is being created by these brilliant creators and she's very proud of it, but she was like, it's not my book. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I thought was a really helpful distinction, was like the way she ends the book is on a cliffhanger. I think it's very much more like the first season of the TV show. There's no real like evidence of a major rescue plan. There's not a lot of like we don't know what happens to this society and this community.
Right.
And
well, that's why I read the book. Is I watched the show and went, cliffhanger, first season. Let me read this book and find out what happens next. And it's just the first season. It's like, oh well, that was
you're like wasted that maternity leave.
Yeah, great.
I haven't watched the TV show. Reading it this time around for me reminded me a lot about the current Iranian revolution. So for those of you who don't know, let me pull up my notes.
And no, we're recording this at the end of October.
At the end of October, yep.
So this will be released much later on, so we don't know the outcome of the revolution.
Yeah, we don't know
yet.
that. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. Like, yeah. What if it's like vastly different than what I'm about to read right now?
Then that's okay. This is a cool time.
That'll be so embarrassing for you.
That'd be, yeah.
Or it's super embarrassing. It's a time capsule, Stephanie.
Oof.
That was a good note, Nicolle.
22-year-old Mahsa Amini was in her brother's car during a visit to see some family members in the capital, and she was arrested by morality police, who then beat her in their van, and then she died a few days after. And the official document declaring her death said it was a heart attack, but doctors have since come back and said, actually, that was a lie. It was from blows to the head and from blood loss and stuff like that. And so since then, women all over Iran have been cutting off their hair in protest. Some of them more anonymously than others, so they'll have their faces facing away from cameras. But they're all doing it in the name of Mahsa Amini and for the bringing to light the oppression that women have been facing under the Islamic rule, essentially. I kind of want to use this also as a segue into how Handmaid's Tale is kind of Christian. And I say kind of because there are many moments where they're quote unquote quoting scripture. That was a weird phrase. They're quote unquote quoting scripture. And you're reading it and growing up Christian, I'm like, that sounds not right. That sounds like something actually from the Marxist, the handbook, Karl Marx's books. Specifically, for each according to her ability, to each according to his needs. Like, isn't that a Marxist phrase? To each according to her?
I don't know, but you're probably right. I can look it up though. We can verify things.
Should we verify?
We can verify.
We'll verify that.
Yeah.
But obviously the pronouns in there are not.
Those are certainly not scripture.
Those are certainly not scripture.
Don't need to fact check that.
Yeah.
I think that what was very disturbing about that book is we're seeing, like in America specifically, and I think we've seen it since Reagan, probably since way before, but I wasn't alive. I wasn't even alive during Reagan. But it's close to my lived experience, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm living the outcomes. It's trickled down, if you will.
Yeah.
I will.
You will. But how religion has been weaponized, and that's what's so stressful is like these stories, which are very complex. I mean, we're reading like the Hebrew Bible, and you're reading parts that are like should be read in context from a perspective that I don't have as a white American Christian. And like we're reading things out of context and then applying them to things. And I think like the sadness I feel when I hear our politicians weaponizing religion against my own body and against my opportunities to live a full life that I know that divinely is my inheritance to be able to choose to do that. It's incredibly disturbing to just see that manipulated and twisted. And I'm sure like our Muslim friends and family also feels that way when they think about Iran and how like their belief system is so empowering. When you believe in a God, that makes you know that the world is so much bigger and you are so much more capable with that God to know that they're using that belief system to make sure that your world is very, very small.
Yeah.
Is very disturbing. And this book was that over and over again, manipulating and twisting pieces of the Bible for the needs of this very specific small community. That also, it's just, yeah. And you see everyone is oppressed in it. Like, no one is not. Like, even the men are oppressed in this system. Mm-hmm. It's not just the handmaid. Like, they're clearly the ones that are just being, like, assaulted day in and day out. But every single person, their world is so tiny because of how this theology has become part of their entire identities and their entire lives.
Mm-hmm. And I brought up that, like, Handmaid's Tale is kind of Christian because of exactly that point, and how the Islamic State is kind of Islamic.
Because, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Kind of.
It's
Christian-ish.
Christian-ish. Because, like, Margaret Atwood made a point of this in an interview where she talked about how the book is not a question of religion making people behave badly. It's a question of human beings getting power and then wanting more of it. And I fact-checked myself, and that quote that I said earlier is from Marx. So it's not even a biblical thing, because she says it's from the Bible, or so they say. That's how she kind of phrases it. Continuing on with that interview from Margaret Atwood, she talked about how people wanting power are wanting to eliminate competition, because they're not interested in belief or in faith. They're interested in compliance, and then using religion as a way to get that compliance. Because then anyone who doesn't agree with you is a heretic. And, like, that makes me think of, so there are billboards in Utah that says, "Make Utah conservative again." And part of me...
It's so
what is it now?
You'd be so surprised. You'd be, like, freaking out right now. It's crazy.
And it makes me... And, like... Listening to people on either side bash the other side as viciously as they do, it makes me, like, there's a balance to everything. And if we remove one side of the scales, then we're at risk of becoming a totalitarian, authoritarian state. And so we do need, so, like, I sometimes think about, like, oh, maybe I should buy some billboard space out of my own funds and just, like, hey, without us, you'd be a fascist state, you know?
And then you can list the 20 Democrats.
So you're welcome.
This is what I mean by us.
Exactly. Yeah.
By the way, we have a podcast.
And, like, we do need that balance in order to not have corruption.
Yeah.
Because in order, like, that is what the horror of a one-party state or a one-religion state or a one-something state is that they have all the say in everything, and they get rid of whoever disagrees.
And they get to manipulate it.
And they get to manipulate it. And they get to put morality police in, and they get to go unchecked, which hopefully the Gen Z Iranians are able to. Yeah, just sending a lot of whatever I can from here to help them.
Yeah.
But
let's talk about what other themes in this book have we found that are important that would benefit a classroom or a family to talk about in their home.
Okay. I've got one. Before I add that, I want to say real quick, Eden, so much of what you were saying made me think of this book is so often compared to, like, 1984, right? It's like, oh, it's the female 1984, which is, I think, a little insulting as a moniker, but right, this idea of, you know, taking control and having all that power, those notes pop for me.
Wait, real quick. I'm going to pause you real quick. Margaret Atwood actually wrote this as a female perspective.
I think
those
female perspective so it's great. I think saying, it's a women's 1984 feels like it's, you know.
Oh, yeah, no, that's messed up.
Anyway, that's not the point. So one of the themes that popped for me in this second time reading it in preparation for this conversation is there was a part in there where it talked about, like fertile women as natural resources. Like, you guys are natural resources, and, like, you know, children are necessary for the survival of society. And so, like, this handmaid model is, like, for the common good, right? Like, that's part of, like, how they justify it. It's like this twisted application of kind of utilitarianism. And there's a quote in there that even says, like, well, better never means better for everyone. It always means worse for some. Which I think has those, like, utilitarian notes of, like, well, greatest good for the most amount of people. And so a theme, this, like, natural resource thing popped for me. And, like, obviously this is an extreme example of finding, you know, moral justification for using someone or something to your advantage. But it has, like, clear application to environmental devastation for me. And Eden, I know at the top you mentioned, right, like, this is an environmentalist book, right? Because it talks about, like, that's what led to infertility. So I doubt this was unintentional. But I think especially as it relates to, like, the actions of wealthier countries taking actions that have, like, the most devastating impacts on developing nations around the world, right? Like, all of these extreme climate disasters we're seeing are a clear result of developed nations, like, using and abusing what they see as, like, natural resources that they have free claim to. So that was, like, a theme that popped for me that I found interesting.
Yeah.
And could be an interesting discussion or conversation, right, in a classroom setting.
Just like, yeah, just discussing how the impact of, like, of environmental decisions can truly affect a person, like, to the point of what a woman wears eventually in her life. Mm-hmm. There's these outfits in the book too that where the handmaids all wear red, and it's very, like, Puritan society clothing kind of. It's almost very similar to the clothes of the of, like, during the time of the Salem witch trials, which is not a coincidence. And they're all in red, and they wear these, like, bonnets that cover their faces. And then the wives wear blue. Who's wearing blue? No, the nurses. The ants? What are they called?
I thought the ants are wearing gray.
The ants are wearing gray. Someone's wearing blue.
I think it's the wives.
The wives are wearing blue. All the wives of these, like, these prestigious families who get to have a handmaid. And they're prestigious in the fact that the husbands did something for this revolution, or they had some sort of say, or they have some amount of power, but we do not know anything beyond that, really. Mm-hmm. And then so you have all these different outfits for these women. The men don't have to do that. And there's this part in the book where the man that she is working for, he, like, is trying to make it easier for her. We don't really understand his intentions. He probably has some weird guilt. Also, I'm sure he's got some carnal stuff, but he keeps trying to get alone with her outside of their, like, regular ceremony to impregnate her. And he, like, takes her to this bar, and he, like, dresses her up. And it's, like, this illegal bar. He dresses her up, and that's where, like, he can finally be free and happy, and he's, like, living his life, you know, like, little Las Vegas 2.0. You see his oppression there too, but you see how this entire structure, like, the ways of the old world haven't changed internally, like, secretly, they're still there. But the way that we interact on the day-to-day in public has completely transformed. And when we do talk about the environment, we often forget about the fact that it will change our day-to-day as we're dealing with these, like, massive problems, and, like, more hurricanes are happening in Louisiana than have ever happened before at a crazy scale. And that's just in America. We also see the heat, like, we're in Utah, and it's still not winter, and it's the end of October. That's terrifying. Like, that's going to change. That is changing our day to day. And we're going to start seeing that affecting different parts as we start becoming more and more desperate, trying to save what we have of our natural environments. And I don't even think we can understand the scale of what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I don't think we can. Like, even just in Utah alone, we're in the middle of a drought. People are still watering their green lawns.
Great for a desert. Makes a lot of sense.
Great for a desert.
It makes sense. It
Great
feels
for
good.
a desert.
The Great Salt Lake is drying up.
The Great Salt Lake is drying up, and there are, like, implications of that. Like,
environmental nuclear bomb. I think that's what the news was calling it.
Yeah. Arsenic is in the lake as a natural phenomenon. You know, it's natural for a salt watered lake, and as it evaporates at this level that it is, it will poison and kill everybody. So, like, there are things that we can, and we don't even know what that's doing with infertility, and the fact that so many developments are being built on radon packed ground that is not safe to be living on. And you have this, like, family focused community here in Utah, And you do see all this infertility stuff. And then you see these abortion trigger laws happening, and people don't even understand the implications of IVF for people who are already struggling with infertility and feel like it is their divine calling to have more children. So you have this like interesting tug and pull happening in Utah already. That like that has to do with the environment as well. That we cannot even like, it is so interesting. So I'm so and then we bring up clothing, and more people are changing how they dress in the summertime because it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter, which it also impacts religious clothing in Utah because we're seeing different trends. And so there's like, it's just, there's so much happening, and it's very interesting to look at from the scope of Handmaid's Tale. I didn't know it was going to go there. One more thing I have to say as well is something I liked about Margaret Atwood's writing is that Offred was not a perfect person. Like, we see her making tons of mistakes. We see her being messy. Like, her marriage that she was in before this whole thing happened, she was the product of an affair. Like, she had an affair with a married man. Like, she's not this, like, holier than thou being. She's not our Joan of Arc that we see being sacrificed. And then when the end, it kind of ends with her maybe being rescued, maybe not. We don't know what that outcome is, but we know that she kept a diary of some sort or recordings of some sort, and that's how we have this document. It's like an anthropological discovery by future societies. But no one in this book is absolutely perfect, and that makes it very relatable. Margaret Atwood was just so good at making sure that no one was a hero, but like we're all that the morals still do win somehow. Like, she knows that she shouldn't be in this situation. Like, she doesn't allow herself to go crazy. Whereas other handmaids do kind of lean into it in an effort to have survival, and Offred like does it sometimes and then sometimes doesn't. Like, you see her waffling, trying to figure out what's right and what's not. And I think, like, what a great conversation to talk about with people, with students.
Yeah, it's really interesting. She's kind of a passive character throughout.
Yeah.
Like, you hear about other handmaids acting out and then being sent to detention camps and stuff like that.
The colonies.
But she kind of just... The colonies, thank you.
Even her own mother was sent to a colony. To the colonies. Because her mother was like a renowned feminist in the societies before,
But yeah, I wonder if there's like commentary on Offred, that passivity turning into complicity, because there's a point where she refuses to call the ceremony rape because nothing is going on here that I haven't signed up for. And I wonder if there's that's another thing we could discuss in an English classroom, of just like what does activism look like in a society where all of your rights have been taken away?
What does morality look like?
What does morality
what
look
are you
like?
allowed to do? Because she technically did not sign up for this. There's a part in the book where she is being dragged and taken while she and her husband and child are trying to run away. And her child is even her daughter is taken from her. Her husband, she has no idea what happened to him. And she is being dragged back into this space because of her fertility. Like, so when she says she signed up for it, that there's some denial going on. There's some denial. And I think a lot of people who have been assaulted or have gone through traumatic situations, we don't understand the grand scheme, like the scope of our victimization until later on, just because sometimes I don't think our bodies and brains can cope with that level of violence upon ourselves. And so I think like that's a coping mechanism to think that you still have free will in this situation. So where is her morality when she has absolutely no choice? And I guess we could argue that with Iran, like how are they able to make moral choices when they don't have the freedom to, and is breaking the law ultimately a higher moral choice? Like, is that where they're like, I don't know. It's what's more moral, trying to survive or trying to affect change? I don't know.
Reminds me of Huck Finn.
Yeah, very Huck Finn.
Very Huck Finn.
Rather go to hell than
I think we should keep a tally of how many times you bring up Huck Finn in your podcast episodes.
We love Huck Finn. It's so good. Maybe you should read it. I don't know, Stephanie. Maybe you'd like it too. I have a copy.
Maybe you shouldn't assume I haven't. I gave a whole monologue about how much I love banned books.
I read Huck Finn every night to my kids. We bleep
my
the N-word, so therefore the book is like 12 pages.
I'm not gonna say I do that.
You don't censor? Stephanie.
I'm not gonna go on record saying I make sure I say the N-word to my kids.
No, you don't say it to your kids.
Oh, good. I thought you said I always say it.
No, you bleep it.
Not today.
Therefore, the book is very short.
Yeah, it's really short.
Yeah. Very fair. Very reasonable.
So help me if you don't edit that part out, Nicolle.
I will see what I feel in the moment. Do you have other thoughts about themes? Because I have a question for both of you. Mm-hmm. As mothers, and you read this while you're on maternity leave, and Eden, I think
just
you...
a light maternity read.
For sure. And you started it or something? What was... Did you ever start it right after, while you were pregnant with Mabel? Or there was... Or what was the... Was there a different book that you started that while you were pregnant that had to do with abortions?
I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember either, but
Eden, you did the School for Good Mothers, right?
That was the one I stopped reading. Yes.
Okay.
I had to stop reading that one too. Could totally handle The Handmaid's Tale. Couldn't do School for Good Mothers.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So that's saying something.
Yeah. We'll get into that. So what was the impact on you with this? Because this was because you said Abby is in kindergarten now, so this was 5 years ago.
Yeah,
5-ish years ago. And so before Roe v. Wade, before doctors were being criminalized for practicing abortion, which also happens in the book, before January 6th, before all that stuff. So when we peel away all the political alignment, what can you, just share your feelings of...
I mean, I wouldn't say before all that stuff because it's 20... let's see, I was pregnant in 2016.
Okay. Yeah.
Like election day. So I'm reading this in like a Trump's America, right? Like, so I wouldn't say it's like after all that stuff because I think that felt really relevant even when it talked about like some of they were protesting and then they were gunning people down that were trying to protest or different things in the book. Eden, do you want to take this one first though?
Yeah.
I don't know that I have.
I'm about to look up when I first read this.
I only ask because you said that you read it while...
Because you only asked because I brought it up.
And so you should have a better... You should have had a better answer. Well, because I can't imagine, because as a woman who... My uterus is looking good. It's in great shape. But...
Fresh.
But my body, because of my rheumatoid arthritis, I cannot physically carry a child. Because I'd have to get off all my medication. It'd be a whole thing. And, there's a small chance that, we could find a medication that works for me. But having this disease for the last 16 years, kind of been through it all, it's a very complicated, highly monitored situation. There can be no accidental pregnancies in this situation. And, abortion is a word that was thrown around a lot for me ever since I was 14. Because ethically, with the medication I'm on, if I did accidentally get pregnant, that's something that I would have to really think about, and ethically I'd have to do. If I was able to plan it out,
because of the impact of the medications on the fetus.
Exactly. And if I had to plan, I would have to plan it out really intensely. When I was reading this book, I looked at the society and I thought, they don't care at all about my rheumatoid arthritis. And I look at the society I'm in today, and they don't care at all about my rheumatoid arthritis. They don't care about my medications. In fact, pharmacies don't want to give me my methotrexate because it is so harmful. And because I am of birth-giving age. So I have to get methotrexate filled in Colorado because certain pharmacists are nervous about being criminalized for aiding and abetting an abortion, even though there's no chance in all hell that I could be pregnant right now. So, there is, so there's this factor of no trust for me. No one trusts me in the system. And also, they don't care about the physical implications because I won't die if I have to carry a baby, but I will be crippled if I go without my medication. So but that's not as important as this baby's life. And so, not that we want to get into this whole thing about abortion, but it's just that idea that I recognize that I do not matter anymore in this system, and that my very nuanced specific issues do not matter on paper. It's whether am I fertile or am I not. can I have a baby? If I can, then I shouldn't be doing these things. And they're not looking at the big picture. And so that's such a terrifying wake-up call for me. And so I can't even, like, I don't have those mixed feelings. I'm just angry. So I'd be curious, yeah, about where you guys are as mothers who might have complicated body stuff. I don't know. But just as mothers who have gone through the process, the beautiful process of giving birth and having this beautiful baby in your life, but also seeing the society forcing other women to do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, while you're talking, so my daughter, Abby, who's 5, I had her when I was living in Cleveland, and Cleveland's, like, maternal mortality rate is like on par with, like, developing nations, especially for Black women. It's a staggering statistic. It's like in every single OB office for my whole pregnancy. And so I think, like, that's something I think about is, like, you know, having a baby, being pregnant, it's not like a no risk thing. And, you know, I was really fortunate, in my first pregnancy to have a pretty, you know, standard routine pregnancy and birth. With my son Jackson, though, who's 2, I had like multiple complications. Both, I had gestational diabetes, right? I had to take, like, insulin to control that. And then I developed, like, hypertension. So, like, on the cusp of, like, preeclampsia, which is a really scary one, and was, induced. And so, like, as someone who has had high risk pregnancy, as someone who, like, is still, like, dealing with the effects of, you know, my blood pressure, you know, 2 years after he was born, like, doctors have consulted, like, if you want to have another baby, like, you would need to meet with a cardiologist. Like, you would need to, like, have these conversations. And so, and I'm like a well-insured, you know, upper middle class white woman. Like, I have access to every resource that I could possibly need, which is so fortunate, and not the reality for so many women and mothers, in our country and, you know, in the world. But I like the concept of having another baby is a scary thing, you know, and of pregnancy. And so the idea of, you know, but of living in this society, like, you have successfully had a child before, you are now this natural resource, you are now gonna, you know, this handmaid person who will produce these children. It's like, actually, that is a life-threatening reality for me, you know, given actually my track record. Not to mention, like, both my kids were almost 9.5 pounds. Like, that is, like, an unpleasant size. So, yeah, like, yeah. So I think, like, that's something I think about. It's like, oh my goodness, if the reason you become a handmaid is because you have proven that you can have children, that is terrifying. Yeah. Because the process of having children is really complicated and often, right, for a lot of women, life-threatening.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. That's so powerful, too. That is I didn't even think about that point. That just because you had one, that's why they were often chosen as handmaids, is because they had one. And it's such a terrifying metric.
Uh-huh. When I was so the last time I read this was 2017. And I'm trying to remember what happened in 2017. This was when I was in Thailand, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because this is before I went to grad school. Okay.
But I wrote down a quote that really stuck out to me then, and then I wrote out another quote during this reading as well. So in 2017 it says, "We lived as usual by ignoring. Ignoring isn't the same as ignorance. You have to work at it." I guess it's a privilege to ignore what's going on around us. Mm-hmm. I remember hearing that a manager of mine never kept up with the news because it never affected him. Like, oh, that is a massive privilege. And you can see here, like, Offred didn't know what she was ignoring because she was ignorant to the situation around her because she did not have access to that information. Mm-hmm. And so access to news and all of that is important To be able to turn it off is a privilege. To be able to not even consider it in your day-to-day life is a privilege. 2022 reading, I wrote, truly amazing what people can get used to as long as there are a few compensations. So that one I thought was really interesting, like if you give a dog a bone kind of thing, we'll be happy with that. And so like what are some things we're getting used to just because we have some privileges in other areas? So yeah, for me, that's maternity leave. I'm just like, oh, like I need more. I want more. And I want my husband to have the same. Because that is going back to a point that you brought up earlier, Nicolle, about how the men in the society are also oppressed. To assume that women are the only ones who need to take leave and to bond with the child assumes that the father doesn't need to. And from like the very beginning of this child's life, this is taking it to the extreme, but essentially they're fatherless because their fathers are sent back to work, and are expected to be at work. And I have a coworker who did not take a very long paternity leave because it was highly suggested from his manager that maybe he should come back for some of his high-profile projects. And now my coworker regrets that. He wished he had more time with his child.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, yeah, we're so grateful for the scraps that we do get.
Yeah.
And then we're willing to fight for more. Like, we're not willing to, but like, we're just, yeah, the fact that he was like, I get a paternity leave, therefore I can cut it off short because at least I'm getting it. Yeah. And like, that is such a scary. Yeah. Yeah.
Even going on to LinkedIn and people's like praising a company for giving them like 12 weeks of maternity leave. I'm like, 12 weeks is when I started to start feeling like a human again.
Yeah, I think we just underestimate how serious childbirth is.
Yeah, honestly.
It's easy. It's easy. You just do it. You guys are both strong. Just do it.
Yeah. Women have been doing it for centuries.
They've only been dying for
it's very natural.
Half of those, so.
For all of them.
And for
all those years, not all those pregnancies. Sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying.
I didn't have a path. I didn't have a path, and you picked up where I was going, and you held my hand to the end. So thank you.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up.
I think so too. I have so much to say about this.
Gotta get to this birthday party.
Yeah.
So I know Stephanie already looked up why this was banned, so we'll quickly, Nicolle and I, guess why it was banned.
Oh no. But you guys look it up at a special place. That's what I was trying to find where you guys look it up.
We don't look
sure
up. We just use Google. We just type it in and see.
Special. I have access to that.
My thinking.
I did find it also on like the American
Library Association.
Library.
That's our
I also...
honey hole.
Honey hole.
Oh, nice.
Ooh.
That's the tagline for the episode.
Ooh. The Handmaid's
Tale. That's our honey hole.
Love it. Okay, my guess of why it was banned is it talks about sex and also it's feminist. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the sex and I wonder if there's like an anti-Christian. People read it as anti-Christian.
What is it, Stephanie?
The drum roll.
It was a drum roll. It was very good. So some of the things that have been brought up: profanity, sexually explicit, religious viewpoint. That's from ALA. The Google lists profanity, overly sexual tones, being anti-Christian, featuring LGBTQ protagonists, and being overall morally corrupt. I know we didn't mention on the episode, but Offred's like best friend Moira from before.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Moira.
Well, you should re-examine your biases for why you would forget about her. But yeah, so those are some of the reasons. As I was cheating and looking up why it was banned, because I didn't know you don't do that on this podcast, I wanted that like framing as I was reading it. And like something that I believe from my research is that like while it's been challenged, for decades, I don't think it was actually officially ban for the first time in 2020.
No way.
Which I thought was really, like, I couldn't find any record. I could see challenge, but the first time it was successfully banned wasn't until just recently.
Whoa. Where was it? Do you know where it was?
Ooh, do we want to do a guessing game?
Yes. I'm going to say in Mississippi.
Close. It was Texas.
Oh, yeah, that should have been the obvious one.
Oh, that adds up.
Yeah, that adds up.
Please cut that out. I don't want to come across as anti-Texas.
Texas, we love Beyonce.
Texas is great.
Schools.
But you guys did go through a weird, really big banning thing last year.
They did. They really went hard on banning.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Well, and I'm curious, even like with that timing, how much of the banning is based on the book versus how much of the banning is based on the Hulu series. Right, like which like you said before, it's not her book. It's like way more expansive. It's much more graphic. And so I know one of the things in this podcast generally is like, how many times are books being banned without actually being read? Mm-hmm. And I'd be curious if this is actually like a prime example.
I'm sure
of that.
Interesting.
I know that I was really hesitant to read this book because I thought it was going to be really intense because of the TV show, and I was like, I'm not ready to go through that. Like, I don't want to be triggered with stuff. I don't want to go through that. I read the book. It was incredibly tame compared to the show. Like, incredibly. Yeah. And to the point where I was like, this is anticlimactic. And now that we're reading it, like, talking about it, I'm like, oh, no, it wasn't. But, like, in the moment, I was like, oh, this is just whatever. But I was so nervous about it. And lesson to the wise. Mm-hmm. Read the book.
The book?
Word to the wise.
Yeah.
lesson to the wise. As they say.
As they're always saying in Texas.
As I have embroidered on my cross stitch behind me.
Lessons to the wisdom. Uh-huh. So that was like, so that was a big lesson for me, was I need to just be more. I just need to read the book.
Right, and like the notoriety behind a book often is much worse than the actual text itself, right? Like I think that happens all the time. Mm-hmm. So there's just one thing that was interesting to me about it being banned for being like anti-Christian or religious views. Like actually made me think about like the argument to not talk about like slavery in schools because it's like too hard for white kids to learn about and they'll feel so bad about themselves, right? It's like, as a Christian, I did not see myself in Gilead, right? Like the society in the book. I did like not see Christianity in that. And it makes me think of, don't teach slavery because white kids will feel bad. It's like, well, you're making the assumption that they'll, identify more with, slaveholders than they would with abolitionists, right? Like, and so they're like, oh, it's anti-Christian. Like, that's not Christianity. Like, that's not what that is. Yeah. And if anything, it's like helpful to see, when taken to the extremes, when you use, religion or whatever viewpoints you have to oppress or to justify, immoral actions, like this is what could happen. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was an interesting thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to make sure it made it on the podcast.
I'm gonna get it in there. I'm gonna move it around.
Yeah.
Stephanie, thank you so much for talking to us. I would like you to be on this whenever you want to. Honestly, you're so interesting and so lovely to talk to. And I'm sure we could have talked, like, we could have spoken for at least another, like, we could have done this for a whole day. There's so much to talk about with this book. Mm-hmm. So much to talk about just with Margaret Atwood's life. Did you know she went by Peggy?
Oh.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, I did not know that. Thanks for sharing that on the podcast.
Yeah, I told her before we recorded. Little secret time beforehand, just for Stephanie's ears.
Also, this didn't make the podcast, but she's related to Mary Webster, supposedly.
Ooh.
Who was
the dictionary?
The dictionaries.
The dictionary's Mary.
Mary Webster.
Mary of the dictionary.
She was tried as a Salem witch.
Yeah. That's cool.
Oh. Well, that's
sad.
Fun. Well, now I feel bad for laughing.
She survived.
Yeah.
Oh,
yay! And she,
what a roller coaster.
And she also is from Canada.
Mm-hmm. She's
so
Canadian.
There's that. She's Canadian, and she grew up in the woods because her dad was like he worked in the environment. Like, he was doing samples and stuff
In the
like that in the
woods.
woods. No, like, the way that the documentary talked about it, it was like, the second she was born, she was in a knapsack in the woods, just living out her life. And she, like, so the natural environment, like, she's just a very interesting, gritty person. Oh, this was an interesting fact, too. We're just throwing all of our facts.
Nicolle, you had your chance to put the documentary in the podcast. We're wrapping up now.
But here's an interesting fact. The Harvard. She went to Harvard, and she wasn't allowed.
The Harvard?
She went to Harvard during the late 50s, early 60s, and she wasn't allowed to go to many of the libraries.
Oh.
And so a lot of the scenery in The Handmaid's Tale are those, like, spaces in Harvard. So, like, where they go and they see all of the people hanging, like, all those bodies that have been killed for being, like, doctors and priests and things like that.
Oh, that's the Harvard hanging wall.
No, seriously, that all, like, the way that she painted it is, like, the different squares in Harvard between these different libraries and places. Isn't that fascinating?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Don't keep her from a library, or she's going to turn your campus into a dystopian society.
Completely.
Peggy is vicious.
Pegs is a lot. So that was very fascinating to me. So she's a cool person. But that's all.
But now we're closing.
Now we're really closing. But I just had to have those cool facts. So thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, we really appreciated you being on this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all for your vulnerability and telling me about your lives and stuff. I'm really grateful. Seriously.
Yeah.
I love talking to women about this stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks all around.
All right.
Okay. Bye, Stephanie.
Catch you all next time.
Have fun.
Bye. Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicolle and Eden Wen.
Music written by me, Nicolle, and produced and performed by my dad, Frank.